One of my friends is considering whether to get an EV and suffering a bit of analysis paralysis. I expect this is a problem that a number of people are going through at the moment, navigating a slightly new set of information in a bid to choose their next car. Me being me, I thought I might be able to help bring a little clarity by putting something together in a video. If you're in this situation yourself, or likely to be advising others on this topic, then hopefully you'll join me as I list a few of the things I would consider when selecting an EV. Today's video is kind of intended to help with a specific scenario, but the thought process should hopefully be useful to lots of people. However, I should start with a caveat, which is that I have not driven all of the cars I'm about to discuss. My experience is limited to a subset of cars on the market. Unfortunately, I have trouble getting comfortable in most cars, so it isn't generally all that good for me to be test driving lots of different things. However, I have now driven well over half a dozen EVs personally, as well as sitting alongside a friend in a bunch more as they tried them on for size, so it's not like I have no experience. Regardless of experience, I will be talking through how I would be making decisions on what to consider, and I think the process is as important as details on any individual car. I should also point out that parts of this video are fairly UK-centric, especially the first section. There are some specifics in it about the UK tax system, and so those parts won't translate very well to other countries. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's have a think about what we need to consider when choosing something. I'm going to break this into two sections. Section 1 compares how you get the car, and Section 2 is about the choice of car. So in this first section, I want to weigh up leasing versus buying. And indeed, leasing is really split into two subsections, namely salary sacrifice and a personal lease. Firstly, if your company offers a salary sacrifice scheme, then it could be well worth having a look at. Salary sacrifice means you pay for the car out of your pre-tax salary, so you avoid paying any tax or national insurance on the monthly lease cost. You do end up paying a little benefit in kind tax on the value of the benefit, but that's usually quite small in comparison to the tax and national insurance savings. Note the benefit in kind tax increases by 1% per year after 2025, so take that into account in your calculations. Secondly, you should be aware that the car is considered a company car when you get it through salary sacrifice. That means if you're going to reclaim the cost of business mileage from the car, the amount you can reclaim is limited to 7 pence per mile, so you need to also take that into account when doing the sums. One thing to bear in mind with a salary sacrifice scheme is that the car is somewhat tied to your employment at that company. In the worst case scenario, if you leave that job, then you might need to arrange some other form of transport. However, you have your notice period to do that, and indeed you can start thinking about it before that, of course. It might be a minor inconvenience, but juggling the timing should be possible in most instances. As with almost all leases, there could be an early termination fee for returning the car early. However, the lease is taken out by the company, not the employee, so the liability for the early termination fee falls on the employer officially. However, employers may pass this liability onto you using clauses in your contract, so be sure to check the fine print of the scheme and know in advance what the situation would be if you wanted to leave the job. It wouldn't be fun to feel tied to a job you want to leave because of a car payment. Having said that, it is sometimes possible to transfer a car obtained through a salary sacrifice scheme to a new employer and their scheme, so that might be an option if the stars align and that transfer can be done. The second option is taking out a lease yourself. You don't get the tax benefits that way, but just at the moment, November 2024 at the time of recording, the UK ZEV mandate means there are likely to be some bargains to be had. The deals that are available occasionally might beat the tax savings you get from salary sacrifice, but there is a bit of luck and some patience involved in achieving that. There are a few lease brokers who aggregate deals from various companies. You could have a look at their websites to see if there are any offers that catch your eye. One such website is Lease Loco, but I'm sure there will be others. Deals on those sites are very model specific and don't last that long. There are sometimes only a couple of cars available at the headline price. What you have to do to get a bargain is avoid being too fussy about what you want. If you have an exact model, trim and colour in mind, then that's not all that likely to work out. Instead, if you can be open-minded, have a few models on the shortlist and be ready to move quickly, there are likely to be a few amazing bargains to be had in the next month or two. Remember that if you lease personally, then the liability for early termination falls to you. However, the reasons for termination are fewer, of course. For example, your access to the car would be unaffected by a change in jobs. Generally, if you return the car early, you are required to pay half of the cost of the remaining lease. So it's expensive to change your mind and return it early. And that tie-in is what stopped me from leasing this time round. My back condition means I find it hard to get comfortable in cars, and the problem doesn't show up straight away. So I needed to be able to change the car again if a problem arose, although fortunately in this case it didn't. I should also mention that it's now possible to lease a used car, and sometimes that's even possible through salary sacrifice schemes. You'd have to look at the cost saving to determine if that's worthwhile to you. The couple I've seen seemed a bit expensive. The other options are about buying, of course. There are various finance mechanisms available to buy a new car, but if you do that, you're likely to take a big hit in depreciation. So if you choose to buy, what I recommend is buying a used car. Just at the moment in the UK, depreciation on new EVs is high, so why not let someone else take that big initial hit and reduce the amount of depreciation you will see on your purchase? I've never bought a car new, so my advice isn't especially about EVs. However, it does seem particularly important on EVs in this current, unusual, transitionary period when depreciation is suddenly so high. Personally, I don't expect depreciation to remain as high as it is at the moment. I've seen various thoughts on why we're in this position just now. It might be a leftover of the odd market conditions we had a few years ago, for example. In fact, the very latest news is that second-hand EV prices are actually rising a little bit. I saw a market analyst say that prices have been up a few tenths of a % in the last couple of months in a row, compared to the overall market being down a % or so each month. Only time will tell if that continues, but certainly paying less for a car means the possibility of loss is reduced. So that's what I did with my Zoe. Section 2 of this video is about what to look for in the car you choose. The good news is that there aren't really many, if any, awful EVs. They've all been pretty good. Probably the most important thing is whether the car is going to suit you. And at this point, I'd suggest you pause and consider carefully what you really need it for. We need to talk briefly about range. If you're going to do very frequent, very long journeys of 300 miles or more, then we need to be a little more careful in our choice. Regular, very long road trips of many, many hundreds of miles determine how important public charging will be, which at the moment still makes a small difference to the choice. If very long road trips are going to be very regular, then we might choose to rule out a few cars with very small batteries. I would maybe discount things like the first generation Mini Electric, the Honda E and the Mazda MX-30. Those are fine for short journeys, but harder to live with if you do longer journeys. In order to manage the number of stops you want to do on a long road trip, you should also be mindful that some of the Stellantis cars are a bit limited including Citroën, Peugeot, Fiat, Jeep and Vauxhall. These tend to have a range of about 200 miles, as a lot of them are built with a roughly 50 kilowatt-hour battery. Now that's far from the end of the world, especially if you're going to need to stop after that distance anyway, but cars with a bit more range might be worth considering. In terms of cars to avoid no matter your usage, personally I would tend to leave the Nissan Leaf off the shortlist these days. It suffers from a bit too much battery degradation for my liking, as well as restrictions on repeated rapid charging in some models. Now that's not to say that the Leaf is an awful car. There are plenty of people who love theirs, and they have certainly served many people well. I just think there are better options now. Personally, I would also not be rushing to choose the Toyota BZ4X, the Subaru Solterra, or the Lexus RZ450e. These are all actually the same car underneath. These cars tend not to rapid charge all that well, and if you're going to road trip with them, then that might be a bit annoying. To be fair, I think the reason they charge slowly is so that they have really good longevity. Indeed, Toyota seem to be offering a 1 million kilometre battery warranty in some markets, but I haven't got to the bottom of exactly which markets, and therefore whether that applies in the UK. If you're able to, consider a car built on a dedicated EV architecture. EV drivetrains need less space than combustion engine vehicles, leaving more room inside for the occupants. But this is more the case for a car designed to be an EV from the ground up, because it will have been designed with less room under the bonnet from the outset. Some manufacturers have hedged their bets, you see, and built cars with a choice of drivetrains. Those cars tend to offer a little less interior space than things designed from scratch for the same size of car. However, we've generally been happy with space in ICE cars in the time that we've had them, so for your first car you might not notice the difference. It's really about whether the exterior dimensions of the car matter to you or not. It's worth saying that range is to be considered, but might not be as important as you think. Personally, I would not choose a car largely because of the range it claims to offer. Generally, the people in the car need to stop every 200 to 250 miles or so to be comfortable, to stretch, to go to the toilet, and to get a drink. And therefore buying a car with more range than that is really just wasting your money. Why spend extra on battery capacity that you never use? Similarly, it's easy to get obsessed with the peak rapid charging speed and buy something more expensive because of that. But peak speed isn't the be-all and end-all. Cars tend not to hold their peak speed for very long, if it's ever even achieving it. So look instead at the 10 to 80% charge time, and don't get too carried away with a few minutes difference between models. You often take longer on a driving break than it takes to get the charge you need. The cost of DC rapid charging at the moment means we should put in only as much as we need at that time, and often the car is charged to the level you need before you're ready to start driving again. My pick of the bunch of cars are those made by the South Korean manufacturers, Hyundai and Kia. These are part of the same group, and all the cars share the same underlying drivetrains. The early generation of cars they made were extremely efficient, offering really long real-world range based on the battery capacity they had. That includes things like the Hyundai Ioniq, the Kia Soul, the Hyundai Kona, and the Kia e-Niro. The only downsides of these cars are that they are slightly pedestrian in their charging speed, but that might not matter to you. They also use shared platforms, so might not offer quite as much interior space as future cars for their exterior dimensions. But have a look and see for yourself. Generally, my advice would be to think about your use case first. If you don't do long road trips regularly, then that opens the door to more options. And think about what you actually do, rather than what you wished you did, or did once many years ago. This is the point at which you should be honest about what you really need. It is easy to get a bit too caught up in the numbers, Don't focus solely on range and charging speeds. These are not quite as important as you might think before you have an EV. To understand this point better, you might want to have a look at one of my previous videos, the one entitled EVs, Not Enough Range, in which I discuss that topic. I'll link to that video from the end screen of this one, as well as from the description. Wait for the end screen to come up for that link if you want it. If you want information on the tech specs of particular cars, I recommend looking at the EV database website. That's ev-database.org. And remember to click on the archive link to see about cars that are no longer available. Try not to get too caught up in the numbers that website shows though. It's easy to see something that charges a tiny bit faster and get carried away and pay more than you actually need to. In general, it will be very rare for people to rapidly charge very frequently. Modern EVs go a long way between charges, and that's something you'll realise once you have one. One quick note about a heat pump. Some EVs are fitted with a heat pump to keep the cabin warm during the winter months. This is more efficient than using a resistive heater, so the car's range is a bit less affected in cold weather. However, in a car with a decent sized battery, the effect is somewhat limited. It will make a difference of between about 5 and 7% in the winter, but if you do the maths, that's not all that much range. If you can get a heat pump without a lot of expense, then it might be worth it, but I think some manufacturers are overcharging for them. Personally, I would not pay £1,000 or more for what is likely to be less than 20 miles extra range in the winter. The number of times it makes a difference could be quite small. The effect is that you might need to stop an extra time on a really long journey in the winter. But if you're anything like me, your long journeys might happen more in the summer. I tend to hibernate a bit in the winter. What's most important about what you choose is the feel of the car, whether you like driving it and whether you like being inside it and using its controls. There are no really bad EVs, but there are differences in the media system that might make a difference to you. What I would say is important is to get a good long test drive, ideally longer than a dealer wants to do with you. See if you can get a demonstrator overnight or for the weekend, or maybe hire one from a car share scheme or app of some sort, something like Turo, Hire Car or Co-Wheels for example. Then you get to be in it and try everything out in peace for a good few hours and know what you like and don't like. In summary, there aren't really any awful EVs. I've mentioned a few to avoid, but even those aren't bad. Range and charging are a bit less of an issue than you might imagine, so be mindful of them, but don't get obsessed. What I think matters most is whether you like them. Do you like the controls and the driving position? Can you get on with the safety systems and the noises that they generate? And the last thing you might want to consider is how long a full car warranty you want. I don't mean the battery warranty, as all of those are very long, but instead the rest of the car, the day-to-day stuff, like the controls, the paintwork and the suspension. The length of the full car warranty varies quite a lot by manufacturer, so consider that in your choice if you are buying and you keep your cars a long time. But of course that matters very little if you lease or intend to replace it frequently. Thanks very much for joining me. Your questions and comments on this subject are most welcome. Are you looking at the moment, and what are the criteria you are using to look? If you've liked the video, then it's a help to me if you click the thumbs up button, and it would help me achieve my stretch goal for the channel if you would subscribe as well. Thanks.